In this short 10 minutes, I would like to share about what is the science of learning. The science of learning in education seeks to improve learning outcomes for all students, in particular, the ones with more special needs or the ones who are less doing well, or the ones who are progressing in slower paces or ways with respect to the current normative paces of our students in our school system. So it does so by trying to integrate knowledge from different fields, such as the learning sciences, and more recently, neuroscience. And with the ability to integrate neuroscience, we are able to bring in the biological aspects of learning and to look into the cognitive and affective processes, mechanisms, factors, and designs that contribute to learning. In order to sustain many of these interventions that have got neuroscience underpinnings, it needs to be, in our view, combined with existing interventions that have already worked well in schools. And so this attempt to bring neuroscience to education and also the problems of practice from education to informing neuroscience studies is one major aim of science of learning in education. And science of learning in education with a C attached to it, SOLA, in other words, is the center for which these things can converge in interdisciplinary ways as we work, not just across the different multiple levels of learning from the biological to the social cultural, but also bringing together researchers and practitioners and policymakers in order to achieve this agenda. So SOLE basically, as I would sum up again, achieves the aim of optimizing learning for all students in the school system, especially those who are progressing in slower paces, emphasizes on the problems of practice. After all, we are already a top performing system, so there are many pedagogical, cognitive, behavioral approaches that are already working. And so we want to delve further into what might still be gap areas and what are gap areas in particular for sub-cohorts of students. And we want to leverage on the biological, physiological aspects, which can be a window into issues like stress, for example, of our students with respect to the assessment practices that we have. And we want to combine the physiological, biological with the cognitive, behavioral, and social cultural dimensions, which research has been ongoing for the last decade. And so we try to bring together both control experiments and classroom interventions in a complementary fashion. And finally, we want to see where are the opportunities across the lifespan, where the windows of opportunities are with respect to how we can enable students to cope with respect to the understandings across the lifespan and to avoid the stacking of risk for our students. And these risks can be from biological all the way to social cultural dimensions. And we want to leverage on both the formal school system and the so-called after-school programs or after-formal curriculum programs, including home settings, including settings within the society, such as the Science Center, in order to see how learning can be afforded in this in the learning schooling lifespan of our students. So SOLAC or SOLE is a multi-level, multi-perspectival endeavor. Okay, through SOLE, we hope to understand learning from different individual factors point of view. Individual factors include behavioral and biological and physiological. We want to also understand the social, collaborative, environmental aspects that interact with the individual factors. We want to understand the interplay between individual and environmental social factors. And this interplay could be mediated by learning designs and teaching pedagogies as they interact both with the individual and environmental factors. And we want to then align these multiple levels of data concerning learning, and for different types of students, there are kinds of strengths and so-called weaknesses. And then we want to basically understand how these different levels interact with each other, and then how they occur across the lifespan. So fundamentally, by scrutinizing the different levels of learning data, we can potentially design learning mechanisms, environments, methodologies, and as they influence policy, recognizing individual differences in this entire mix of understandings, and yet enable learners not just to define it by way of individual factors, but as they participate in social practices such as collaborative learning, very consistent to 21st century learning and instruction. And so SOLE, in a nutshell, is something that we want to endeavor interdisciplinary-wise and from research all the way to practice and policy translations. And it has got linkages with other existing centers in NIE, which we can work closely and collaborate with. One is AI in education. We know that science of learning is going to generate big data and data from biological all the way to social cultural perspectives. And we need AI algorithms and models to help us see trends within these data sets and to understand how they might be able to create extrapolations to data points and for learning profiles that we might not be able to productively spend time in classroom interventions on. So AI and its algorithms might be able to help us on that. Another front is assessment. You know that assessment is a big issue in Singapore. But from the science of learning perspective, there are the cognitive, there are the physiological, there are the social aspects of assessment. And we want to figure out through science of learning methods how we can possibly inform assessment practices and to give all students in Singapore an equitable opportunity with respect to what these assessment for learning and assessment of learning would entail. Another thing that I've explained earlier is special needs, but not to go so far as to the spectrum on the continuum end of special needs. There are learner differentiations that we want to be more nuanced with science of learning data as we characterize the data points according to different individual characterizations, and as these characterizations of individual profiling interact with the social environment and to the mediating artifacts that would be able to be afforded through the through informed learning sciences interventions. We want to be able to map out these different techniques, approaches, pedagogies, and designs for different groups of learners, from special needs all the way to mainstream, or even to gifted education per se. But we want to focus on that end that is able to leverage more on SOLE approaches. Finally, I think we can also make productive linkages to CCE, character and citizenship education, because neuroscience approaches give us a window into what happens in the neural circuitry before they can happen in cognitive, behavioral, observational contexts. This means that we might be able to understand the implicit nature of knowledge and learning. And this also means that there are character and values dispositions in CCE that might be able to benefit from SOLE techniques. So if we want to understand even the notion of gestorial enactments and how gestorial enactments align to intuitive resources that we might develop in our thinking and our acting, there are types of learning techniques that have a window into what happens in the neural circuitry would be able to inform us on this entire implicit dimensions of knowledge. So SOLE is a very exciting endeavor. It is interdisciplinary. It hopes to have practice to policy impact trajectories, and it's intentional that we do so. And it's able to bring the different sciences from neuroscience to learning sciences to cognitive sciences and also to pedagogical sciences together in order for dialogue and for productive collaborations going forward. Thank you very much.